Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Sometimes the best way to find a living is to stay right where you are and study with UAS online. Career-specific distance programs from the University of Alaska Southeast are the fastest way to increase your earning power.
We connect all over the world.
The National Weather Service.
And good Tuesday evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you from the National Weather Service. It is the 11th of October now. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can find that various ways. One of those on the phone, 800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska, weather.gov/Anchorage/Juneau, or /Fairbanks. That localizes your information even more. And you can always send us an email if you're having trouble finding exactly what you want. You can't find the climate report, you'd like to look at the radar or the satellite, or you really like that one-glance forecast that you used to see. We can find all that for you and guide you to it. Send us an email at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. That'll reach the TV team. If you want to just send it to me, drop in david.snider@noaa.gov, and I'll be happy to answer your questions or talk to you about Alaska weather anytime. Speaking of, if you still have questions, you're still looking for a different option to find an earlier broadcast of Alaska weather, you can always watch on the AKwx system. Alaska Public Broadcasting shows that around Bush, Alaska at 5:30. If you like to watch around the Fairbanks area, KUAC 9.4 is the UAF TV channel there. That is also at 5:30. So if you're watching us now on KUAC, you are live and watching me live wave all the way down here from Anchorage. At 7:30, 360 North will show the statewide. You can find that there. Sometimes the channel on your dish or your GCI cable box might say Alaska, ALSKA. It kind of leaves out one of the A's in there, so watch for that. 360 North there at 7:30, and then of course Alaska Public Media at 5 o'clock the following morning. But Alaska Public Media also helps us out on YouTube a little bit earlier on in the evening, around, say 7 o'clock or so. You can find it online on youtube.com. And if you go to the search bar and type in AKwx TV, short for Alaska Weather TV, you can get that full broadcast. And the cool thing about YouTube is, if you don't want to watch the aviation section, just take that slider bar and scrub it all the way to the right. It's called scrubbing. Scrub it all the way to the right and jump ahead to the marine section. If you don't want to watch the marine section, stop watching when we get done with the turbulence. They're in the aviation section. So an easy way to kind of zip and zoom through the show there online if you can get to that through broadband or on your mobile device. Hazardous weather tonight. We're talking about rainfall. If you're in Kodiak, you know it has been raining. And on the eastern side of Kodiak, especially south of Kodiak City, it's been raining a lot. More than 2.87 inches has been collected there at the Kodiak Airport as of midday. And south of the Coast Guard base, we suspect it's rained more than 4 inches or so. Of course, some of the roads may be having trouble dealing with that, so we are monitoring that with local officials just in case there's a possibility of some landslides there. So the higher slope terrain is certainly something to keep watch on tonight if that's an issue that your area usually has trouble with there, if you're especially south of Kodiak City. Expecting another 2 to 3 inches of rainfall as we head through the evening hours. So again, it's an issue. A flood advisory is posted for those areas, as Sargent Creek has been overtopping parts of the highway there as far as we know. So if you have pictures, if you have rainfall reports, contact your local officials and they'll relay that to the National Weather Service, or just tweet us or put it on Facebook and say, hey, here's what I'm seeing in my community down around Kodiak Island. We'd love to know that information, and that helps all of us do our jobs even better for you in Kodiak or anywhere in part of Alaska. So we'd love to get that information, and thank you for sharing that with us in advance. Here's a look at the satellite picture. This is the infrared satellite picture. It's getting harder and harder to use the visible satellite pictures because the days are getting shorter and shorter. And that makes me a little sad, but no, so it goes. Here we go. Low pressure is organized in 2 circulations right now across the southern Bering Sea and into the North Pacific. And we still have our big friend, the rough, tough, and hard to bluff ridge of high pressure across the eastern Gulf of Alaska and over the Copper River Basin and over a great deal of real estate for our Canadian friends. But low pressure is starting to kind of sidle up here and kind of creep in a little bit and say, hey, get out of the way. I want to come in here. It's October. It's storm season. Move. And it is. High pressure slowly giving way. And so as that creeps into the central and eastern Gulf, we're starting to see more clouds make their way over to southeastern Alaska. But because the process is so slow, this band of rainfall has just been hammering Kodiak Island. And the winds have been moving over southwestern Alaska. And the rain and the unsettled weather just hovering over the central and eastern chain. And more of that warmth is working its way northward, up toward the North Slope. That's likely one of the reasons that there's not a whole lot of ice right now up across the North Slope, and there's not a whole lot of snow cover on the ground in places like Barrow, where this time of the year it would be a little bit more normal to have snow covering the ground. So it's been a little bit slow as far as the onset of winter. The interesting thing is, a lot of the time when these patterns break down, all of a sudden, wham, the bottom falls out, and here comes the cold, and here comes the ice, and here comes the snow, and like, oh yeah, this is how it's supposed to be, except that transition's a lot faster when it comes around, isn't it? So here we go, satellites in motion, southeasterly flow working up the southwestern coast. You can see several waves of low pressure kind of zooming out and around the overall flow. The general flow is from southeast to south and west, and you can see how that moisture has been working its way northward. Over top of all this is a huge omega, a Greek letter there. It looks like an upside down shaped U pattern. And when you see that on the satellite chart, or you see that on the jet stream map, as you will here in just a few minutes, it's a blocking pattern. And either end of this, it's pretty unsettled. Right underneath it is that ridge of high pressure, and that's just holding everything right in place. So trying to undercut that is low pressure. We have a 970 millibar low and a 980 millibar low just a little bit further to the south. These two systems are going to combine eventually. The occlusion is already falling apart there, so this is getting weaker and weaker, but it still has moisture out in front of it, and high pressure is still trying to do everything it can to hold it back. A little bit of snow shower activity up on the north slope south of Wainwright today, and across the northern part of the YK Delta, some rain showers, a few of those up around St. Lawrence Island and over the Bering Strait, and on the north side of low pressure. Now, all in all, the wave of low pressure working across the Gulf still has a lot of dry air to work through, so this isn't going to be a rapid onslaught of rainfall approaching southeast. In fact, it looks even drier than it did this time yesterday. Low pressure combines to 973 millibars, high pressure sitting across the Copper River Basin, and looks like pretty cool and clear skies for just about all of the interior of Alaska tonight. So the clouds that you see tonight will probably fall apart as you get into the overnight hours. For Wednesday, high pressure still intact. Rain showers starting to move back into Prince William Sound on the eastern side of Kenai Peninsula, and more clouds than rainfall it looks like for most of southeast. But notice that pressure gradient for you in southeast starting to tighten up a little bit, and the winds will be coming back, especially in the northern parts of southeast, so watch for that. There is a fog across the north slope, especially along the coastal areas, but if you don't have fog, the winds will probably be more of an issue than anything else. Watch for the winds to come up across the Beaufort Seacoast as well. Persistent easterly flow will be working through your region, and low pressure just south of Sandpoint at 978 millibars, still going strong. We still have our front working its way north and east ever so slowly. And the pressure gradient's also fairly tight here across the Aleutians, so that means the winds will be with us for at least another day or so. As we get into Thursday, that gradient relaxes. The winds should diminish somewhat in many areas out across the west, along the western coast, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island. You're still dealing with rainfall as we get into Thursday. And here's our low now. It's made it across the Gulf. You don't see high pressure sitting in the way anymore. But it looks like the best chance of rainfall is really going to be confined to the central and southern parts of southeast. Clouds will sneak their way northward a little bit, maybe up toward the capital city and maybe into the Lynn Canal. But that pressure gradient is still there. So that's going to help keep some of the clouds out of the way. But boy, the winds be blustery there as we get through Wednesday night, and into Thursday if you're in the central and northern parts of southeast. Rainfall never really seems to make it into Anchorage. It's going to get close. It'll be over the Kenai Mountains, Kodiak, and over Lake Iliamna there. An impressive lenticular cloud there. If you were flying in and out and around Lake Iliamna today, you probably saw this huge thing. It looked like a flying saucer there. Boy, it was a beautiful cloud, but a sure sign of turbulence and wave action in the region. And clear skies continue for the interior, for the Seward Peninsula, Kotzebue Sound areas, and up north. Looks pretty smooth, cool and clear for many locations. 40s and 50s today for southeastern Alaska. Yakutat had 54 degrees, one of the warmer spots, as well as Sitka. 58 as you get down toward Craig and Klawock. 50 for Hyder and Stewart. Juneau had temps holding in the upper 40s late this afternoon. 42 in Valdez, 54 in Cordova, 43 for Anchorage. It was 56 in Homer and upper 40s if you're watching from Kenai tonight. 49 around Talkeetna by 3 o'clock this afternoon, 59 around Healy, and temps in the upper 40s for Fort Greely, 50 around the Middle Tanana Valley and Fairbanks, 46 in Eagle. It was 39 in Fort Yukon. A look further north shows Arctic Village at 37. Anaktuvuk Pass was only 30 degrees. Around the coastal plain, temps were in the upper 20s by mid-afternoon, and you can see most areas along the coast were in the lower 30s. A few spots like Kaktovik dangerously close to that freezing point there. Wainwright was 32. Kotzebue Sound temps considerably warmer, back in the mid-40s from Kivalina all the way around to Shishmaref and Kotzebue. 50 in Nome, 46 around St. Lawrence Island and Savunga. It was 40 in Galena. Unalakleet was 46 degrees. Amana close to 50 degrees. Lake Iliamna saw temperatures back in the lower 50s there. Around Bristol Bay, we saw highs in the lower to mid-50s for King Salmon and Dillingham, all the way down toward Port Hayden, back toward Cape Saracheff, and Sandpoint was 54 degrees as well. Lower 50s under the rain in Kodiak. That's a lot of warm air for you. 50 degrees in St. Paul. And upper 40s for Adak, Atka, as well as Attu at 44 degrees, a little bit cooler out west. Temps will hover in the lower 40s out around the chain in the Alaska Peninsula tonight. We'll see lows closer to 50 degrees into Bristol Bay. Once you get inland, you can see how that cool, dry air really takes hold, and under a clear sky, those readings could drop into the teens for the Yukon Flats and the upper Tanana Valley, as well as the Copper River Basin there, and the valleys. Oh, man. Down to 11 degrees there around Golconda is possible. Low 30s maybe around northern Cook Inlet, a little bit milder as you head southward toward Kodiak Island. Low to mid 30s for the northern parts of southeast. A little more cloud cover for southern southeast. You get closer to the 40-degree mark like Sitka. The North Slope, upper 20s and low 30s for you. Kotzebue Sound temperatures 30s to about 40 degrees, and Norton Sound temperatures back in the mid to upper 30s tonight. High temperatures tomorrow will be cool up north in the 30s there for the Yukon and Kuskokwim valleys, 40s and 50s. Bristol Bay temperatures close to 60 degrees, 40s and 50s for the chain and the Alaska Peninsula, and 40s and 50s for southeast, with south central back in the lower to mid 50s for your Wednesday. Flying weather shows IFR conditions for the North Slope out over the Gulf and over the Bering Strait as we get into the afternoon. Not a lot of change up north, but you will see IFR changing a little bit more around Kodiak Island and the Northern Gulf and north of Unalaska and Dutch Harbor westward toward the Pribilofs through the afternoon. Pass conditions look pretty good for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass, all at VFR conditions up north tomorrow, but north of that you'll run into marginal conditions. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect to transition to MVFR. Rainy Pass looks pretty good all the way around the Horn to Windy Pass. Isabel Pass and Mentasta Pass, we expect to see VFR. VFR conditions through Tanita Pass expected through Wednesday, and a little bit of a change into MVFR as we go through the day for Portage Pass. Right now, Chilkoot and White Pass look to be pretty good at VFR. Freezing levels are a pretty tight gradient here as you head across the Alcan border, as you would expect. Pretty high levels here across the interior, above 10,000 feet, but then the bottom starts to fall out as you move out west and get behind that wave of low pressure. So levels around the south coast and the west coast still between about 8 and 10,000 feet. That goes for southeast Alaska as well. Icing potential is focused along the frontal boundary, where levels could reach into the occasional to widespread moderate, mainly above 8,000 feet out west as well, and a light to isolated moderate should be expected around Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern chain, and just approaching southeast Alaska as we go through the day tomorrow. Here's that jet stream and that Omega block. Here is all of the unsettled weather wrapping around low pressure with wind speeds up to 140 and 160 knots, and then very stable weather over most of mainland Alaska, and all the cold weather on the eastern side of the system moving into the lower 48 states. Underneath that, we have south and easterly winds working across southern Alaska, 30 to 50 knots from the east and southeast. Very light winds along the Yukon Valley and northward next to high pressure, and much gustier conditions under southwest Alaska, the central and western Aleutians, all wrapping around that low pressure system. And you see that at 3,000 feet as well. South and easterlies going strong over the Gulf, anywhere from 20 knots over southeastern Alaska, over the Gulf at 45, and then slowing once again over southwestern Alaska at 30 to 45 knots. Look for stronger winds from the north and west for the central and western chain, and light winds up north at 3,000 feet, winds blowing from east to west about 10 to 15 knots. Turbulence conditions probably won't change much from today. We're going to stay very focused around southwestern Alaska below 4,000 feet with occasional widespread moderate to isolated severe, likely once again around the Aleutian Range and west toward the Wood River Mountains and out toward the southwestern coast. That's a look at your forecast for the aviation communities. We'll be back in just a few minutes with the rest of your marine weather. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. As you well know, you can get forecast information for any day of the week. Today, tonight, tomorrow, out to 6 or 7 days. It includes the high and low temperature, the wind direction, the chance of rain or snow in your part of Alaska. But did you know that there is information available to forecast out to 2 weeks? So the question is, how would you use that information? And here to answer that question today and tell us a lot more about climate services from the U.S. National Weather Service Alaska region is Rick Thoman. He's the program manager for the Climate Science and Services. And Rick, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Dave.
How would we use information that is out to 2 weeks instead of just the high and low and the chance of rain?
Well, Dave, as we move out in time, of course, forecasts become more uncertain. So as we move into that second week from now, we're not looking at specific highs or lows or precipitation amounts at any given place. What we can do with the state of the science at this point is get a handle on patterns. So we can say things like increased chances for stormy weather in the Bering Sea in 2 weeks, or we've been in a cold weather pattern. Looks like 8 to 10 days from now, that pattern's going to change. Those are the kind of forecasts that we can currently make in that second week.
So you're increasing lead time for perhaps big or small weather events and telling us the likelihood of maybe more coastal storms or wind events in some areas?
Those are the kinds of things that that we hope to be able to let Alaskans know in the second week forecast. And if you have an activity or an event that you would find that kind of advance notice useful, whether it's moving stuff off of the beach, whether to go out hunting or to come back from camp, those kind of decisions, the week 2 provides the opportunity for you to get a handle on that kind of information.
Okay. What other type of weather impacts that we're familiar with might Alaskans use climate services for?
Well, in the forecast realm, we can go provide some information from this week 2, say the 8 to 14 day period, on out to the monthly and even seasonal time scale. Now, those monthly seasonal forecasts are still kind of just really very much pattern dependent, and the amount of detail that we can provide at this point is still pretty limited. Generally, indications of how temperature and precipitation will fall in maybe above normal, below normal kind of range. But in the week 2 period, we can be considerably more specific than that as far as the general patterns and really the impacts on Alaskans.
Okay, so we would be talking about generalizations there that would tell us that the period might be more stormy, might be more hot, more dry, more cold, and situations like that.
That's correct. So we're not going to be able to say in which community, for instance, there's the threat of coastal flooding, but we can often be able to tell we're moving into a pattern that would be conducive to big Bering Sea storms. So if you're in an area that could potentially impact you, you'll want to pay attention to the weather forecast.
Okay. Now, every day and every hour of the day, the National Weather Service is working on a forecast for the next day. But how do you start your forecast process for that extended period that goes out beyond 7 days?
Well, the way things work right now, we start off with the expected general flow pattern for Alaska and the whole world, really, and then we narrow that down to Alaska. So we start off with the basic computer model forecast. There's quite a few different computer models that we look at, bring those together. And then another important part of that is we attempt to assess the confidence. The reality is often 2 weeks away, the computer models are very divergent. They have lots of different solutions, and that's an indication that we don't have much confidence. But when we see more agreement in that time frame, and when that agreement is a pattern that will be potentially very impactful for Alaska or is a big change from what we've been in, that's when we can then take that expected pattern. We have computer models forecasting it. We've assessed the confidence. Now we can move that forward. how, using our experience as Alaskan weather forecasters, how does that typically play out for Alaska? So is this a stormy pattern for the Bering Sea? Is this an extra rainy period for Southeast? Is this the kind of pattern that generates strong winds potentially in the Anchorage Bowl? Is this a deep cold pattern for the interior? All of those are the kind of things that we're looking at in these large-scale patterns. That's very different than telling you that the winds on 10 days from now are going to be gusting to 120 on the hillside. We're looking for patterns, not the very specific information that the Weather Service will then hone in on as the event gets closer.
So the idea is to keep the 5, 6, 7 day forecast the same, where you are getting the standard high and low temperature and the chance of wind or rain, but further out you get a broad general forecast, but as the time gets closer to that event, we'll get a lot more specific.
That's correct.
Okay, very good. So how can people use this information if I am out in the bush and I want to see, is a coastal storm expected in my region, or is a chance for that improving over the next 2 to 3 weeks? Where could I go to get information like that?
When we see that potentially impactful or a big change in the weather is coming 8 to 14 days out, typically we will start to highlight that on the Weather Service Facebook site. We might produce a YouTube video highlighting that, linking that on our Facebook site. So often we don't, at this point, we don't have much to say in that because we're really looking for those forecasts of opportunities. But one thing we can say very likely as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, there'll be more and more of this kind of forecast information available in that week 2 time frame.
Okay, and something that emergency managers and city planners and folks in villages might be interested in keeping an eye out for, looking for that information to be headlined, whether that's on social media or perhaps through the National Weather Service channels there to get information from you to make better plans a little bit longer term and make better preparations in the event that things become a little bit more unsettled.
Absolutely. Climate Services with the National Weather Service Alaska region is talking to the state of Alaska every week, apprising them of that 2-week outlook. And on the social media side, we are working to keep Alaskans informed so that when we think we have some confidence in a high impact or a big change, that's the best way right now for folks to find out about that. Twitter, Facebook, so stay tuned to your National Weather Service.
Very good, a developing program. Rick Thoman with the National Weather Service Alaska region. He's a Climate Science and Services Program Manager. Thanks so much for joining us again, Rick, and I hope to have you back again soon.
Great, thanks, Dave.
For another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider. We'll see you next time. Always good to have Rick on. He is Mr. Encyclopedia for Alaska weather and certainly Alaska climate. A good source of information for all of us. Here's a look at southeast marine forecast now, and you can see a broad southeasterly flow working its way into Clarence Strait, but certainly along the outer coast there with high seas 16 to 17 feet and winds at least 35 knots. There's going to be higher gusts developing on the inside as well. 15 knots up around the Lynn Canal on Wednesday from the north. But look what happens on Thursday. A pretty sizable shift. 30-knot winds there across the inner channels and up toward the Lynn Canal. The 6-foot seas expected there, and an offshore flow all the way from Yakutat down toward the Dixon entrance at 25 to 35 knots, and seas come up even higher to 18 feet outside of the Dixon entrance, 5 to 6 foot seas on the inside for Thursday. For South Central, we're still dealing with some very strong winds, storm force winds in fact, inside of the Barren Islands on the east and west end. 45 knots there with 16 to 21 foot seas, 20 foot seas east of Kodiak Island, and easterlies up to 40 knots inside of Shelikof Strait and coming down south of Calgon Island from the north and east as well. Winds from 20 to 40 knots on either side of Montague Island, 4-foot seas inside of Prince William Sound. Those diminish substantially as you get into Thursday, 10 knots from the north and east. And seas diminish as well, 2 to 5 foot seas inside of Cook Inlet, 10 to 20 there from the north and east, and winds diminish around the Barrens and Kodiak Island, 25 knots with a 8 to 14 foot sea in the western Gulf. For the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, easterlies working across the bay, 9-foot seas on a 40-knot wind. The east and northeasterly flow wrapping around low pressure at 15 to 30 knots with 16-foot seas in the North Pacific for Wednesday. That holds around 15 to 20 for Thursday with 12 to 13-foot seas in the Pacific, 5-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, and an easterly wind working down the Bering Sea coast, 25 knots with a 7-foot sea on Thursday. For the Aleutians, 30 to 40 knot winds will not be uncommon, wrapping into the backside of the low pressure wave that's working its way gradually eastward. Westerly certainly feeding into that, and again, you can have some much stronger winds north of Adak and Atka with 17-foot seas there. And as we get into Thursday, look for some improvement. Winds diminish to about 20 to 35 knots in many areas. A southwesterly flow north of Nikolsky and Alaska at 15 knots. 14-foot seas on the Pacific coast, 10 to as high as 14-foot seas along the Bering Sea coast. Out west, 8 to 10-foot seas from Kiska to Attu with a west and southwesterly flow at 20 to 25. Offshore winds working off the YK Delta and out of Norton Sound, 25 to 30 knots in most areas. Kuskokwim Delta winds around 40 knots with an 11-foot sea, and northeasterlies for the Pribilofs, 15 knots with an 8-foot sea, for Wednesday. And as you get into Thursday, an easterly shift there around the Pribilofs, 20 knots with an 8-foot sea, 5 to as high as 7, even 8-foot seas out across the northern Bering, with easterlies working across St. Matthew at 20 knots with an 8-foot sea, 15 knots around St. Lawrence Island, 7-foot seas there going into the Bering Strait. And then we're going to deal with some stronger winds across the Beaufort Seacoast, 35 to 40 knots with higher gusts in the region, and seas anywhere from 4 to 11 feet there across the Beaufort Sea, 5 to 8-foot seas for the Chukchi on Wednesday. And as we get into Thursday, really not much of a change. Winds will diminish across the Beaufort Seacoast, 9 to 10-foot seas there, and 6 to 8-foot seas for the Chukchi Seacoast, 15-knot winds from the east outside of Kotzebue Sound on Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, rain will continue for Kodiak Island. Another 2 to 3 inches of rain is possible, especially on the eastern side, and a flood advisory is in effect because flooding has been reported around Sargent Creek area, and it is overtopping the highway in some cases there. So report any damage, report any rainfall amounts and pictures. We love to see them on Facebook and on Twitter. Simply tag us. If you're on Twitter, use the hashtag AKwx. Dry and cool conditions continue for the interior and the north. Clouds creep into southeast as we get into Thursday with rain and gusty winds developing. Thanks for watching Alaska.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, sustaining Alaska's pipeline and its operations today and into the future.